Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and the very nice introduction. So I'm really happy to join this unique initiative. I'm also teaching a course which is about to end and now already, and so I'm looking forward to meeting this unique community in another context. Thank you also to Ludger and Judith for preparing some reading. I acknowledge that I had not sent any reading, probably because I'm not doing exactly research on cities. So probably what you have available now to the UN Habitat Report is more closely related to the topic, the overarching topic, than anything I could have found. But I hope it is useful for that discussion on great transformations in post-industrial cities to have some idea on how economists look at shifts in the economy and shifts in employment. So my talk is more about great transformations and industrial, post-industrial change, rather than on cities or superdiversity and innovation, which are obviously also greatly interesting topics. What I present here also combines a little bit of my usual teaching, so I will introduce you to the notions of structural transformation and digital transformation, and then add only very brief reflections on economic shifts in urban areas, which is not exactly my topic, but I think of urbanization, urbanization is a trend and transformation of cities that has happened in a way that has been intertwined with structural transformation and digital transformation. So what is structural transformation? Structural transformation is just the economic trend that has transformed our economic lives for a bit more than 2 centuries already, so since the Industrial Revolution. In rich countries, much of structural change is already completed, at least if we consider the traditional notion of structural change. In middle income and poor countries, it is still continuing. Urbanization has been one feature of structural transformation. Now, as I said in this short lecture, I want to highlight what economists understand by structural transformation and also how they observe it. And then I will come to the more particular dimension of digital transformation. And as I understood that employment is an issue of particular interest to that lecture, I will in this short time limit my considerations to employment effects of digital transformation. There are 3 levels at which economists consider structural transformation. The first is they look at a country's GDP, so the gross domestic product, and they look at its sectoral composition. So the GDP is the market value of all final products in a year in a country, and these products are produced in different sectors, or their value added is produced in different sectors, and this sectoral composition of GDP has been changing over time. So this is one dimension of structural transformation. Along with it, also the composition of employment has changed. So if, for example, more services are produced, then also more people will work in the service sector. And the third dimension relates more closely to what we finally enjoy. Economists maybe have a very simple view of the world. They consider that what we mostly enjoy is not producing or working, but consuming. And if the things produced change in an economy, then obviously also the things consumed change, or a major reason why the things produced change is that people want to consume other products. A very broad picture of structural transformation considers only 3 sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, and services. Obviously, there is no problem with going to a more fine-grained differentiation here, but for this very short introduction, I will limit my consideration also mainly to these. And what I would like to share with you is that the numbers really show a very big and very clear-cut picture of structural change over the last 2 centuries and also in more recent time. So here, I hope you can see that it's taken from a handbook chapter by Herrendorf and co-authors. We have statistics on structural change. I will spend a moment to explain this. It's data from 2 centuries. Now, obviously, data for the earlier times here are backcasted numbers. The GDP didn't exist as a concept in 1850, so these are backcasted numbers with assumptions. And the data are from 8 or 9 currently rich countries, including a couple of European countries, Japan, Korea, and the United States. And let's first have a look at the left-hand side. It's about employment. And on the horizontal axis, you see how rich a country is. Yeah, so it's not the time here, but how rich it is in terms of log GDP. And on the vertical axis, you see the share of a country's workforce that at a certain level of GDP was employed in agriculture and manufacturing and in services. And I mean, the values scatter a bit around, but overall there's a very clear-cut picture. Employment in agriculture in all countries observed over 2 centuries has been drastically going down from values initially, depending on the country, between 40 and 80%, or I would say initial values are even higher everywhere, somewhere 70, 80%, to something below 10%. Now, in the manufacturing sector, we observe a hump shape evolution. So we start from very low employment in manufacturing sector, going to maximum values depending on the country between 30 and 50% of the workforce. And then as countries become richer again, then this share declines. And as a consequence of the 2 preceding trends, we have in the services an evolution that is exactly inverse to the evolution in agriculture. So initially, a low share of people works in services between 10 and 20%. And nowadays, depending on the country, the workforce in services can be as high as 80%. Now, on the right-hand side, you see exactly the same kind of story, but this time not employment numbers are represented, but numbers of value added produced in these 3 sectors. Now, given the short time, I won't go into some nuances of differences between what we see in employment and what we see in value added, but I just want to emphasize the overall picture we have here, that really structural change is a drastic transformation of the economy that we can see over the period of 2 centuries for a number of different countries. Now, you may notice that we have only currently rich countries here, and this is why I would like to add the same kind of picture for employment only for a different, shorter time frame. The reason is just that there are no more data available, but a larger number of countries. So the countries are not all listed here, but this includes more middle income countries, and you can see the same pattern. So with increasing GDP, employment in agriculture declines and employment in services increases. Now the shape for manufacturing is a bit different, and the reason is that Here we include a number of not yet very rich countries that have not yet had a really declining trend in manufacturing yet. Coming to the final dimension of structural transformation, the third one I mentioned, consumption. Now, data on consumption, on what citizens of a country consume, is much rarer than for employment and value added. And this is why in that handbook chapter, we have only two countries, United Kingdom and United States, but with a quite long time period of virtually the whole 20th century. And we see that, I mean, the shape of the data is a bit different, but again, we have that overall pattern of the share of total consumption expenditure spent on food declining. I have to emphasize here, it does not mean that people eat less nowadays than they did 100 years before, just the share of their consumption budget that they need to spend on food has been declining. The share spent on manufactured goods has a hump-shaped evolution here with increasing GDP, and the share spent on services is increasing. So structural change has drastically transformed the economy, and you can, if you look at more detail, you could then differentiate between different kind of manufactured goods, and different kinds of services. But this is probably the biggest trend, the one at the three sectors that you can see. What are the reasons for this? First reason is that technological progress has been uneven across sectors. It has been much stronger, technical progress and associated productivity increase in agriculture and manufacturing, and this leads to a price decline of products in these sectors, relatively to prices for services. Prices for food and for manufactured goods have been declining. This is one driving force. There is a second separate driving force, which is known in the literature as Engel's law. If people are very poor, they need to spend a large share of their budget on food just to survive. Once people become richer, I mean, we all know that even if we maybe want to increase our quantity and quality of food above subsistence level, at some point is not beneficial anymore to eat more. And then if we are wealthy enough, we have money left to spend on other things, on fabricated goods and on services. As I already mentioned, in rich countries, this broad picture of structural transformation has come to a, kind of stabilized situation. It's not continuing anymore at the same speed, because, if you have already 80% of people, or between 60 and 80% of people, depending on the country, in the service sector, there's also not much scope remaining for more structural transformation in this way. Recent research points to shifts that are now more within the service sector, within the service sector, so especially from services with low knowledge intensity to services with high knowledge intensity. So knowledge intensity means here how much input of ideas and skills is needed to produce these services. And I think knowledge intensive services are a topic of special interest also to the economy of post-industrial cities. And you could also look at data that show then some kind of shift along the lines shown before within the service sector. However, it will not yet be as uniform and as drastic. Coming now to the digital transformation. Now, there are a lot of things to be said about digital transformation. Here, and we could see digital transformation just as one specific aspect of the structural transformation. Today, I want to limit my considerations to the question how digitalization has been changing jobs. And there's a very well-known debate. Here it is represented with covers from a German periodical, Der Spiegel, but you could probably find the same kind of story in other English-speaking or other periodicals. So this is a compilation by Jens Südekum from Düsseldorf. And you see here 3 titles from 1964, 1978, and 2016. Now in 64, it's about automation in Germany, and you see this kind of humanoid robot that a bit looks, and you have also a person falling down, and so this seems to suggest that now it's a robot that makes the cars, not the people anymore. And 14 years later, the title is more explicit: The Computer Revolution, Progress Makes You Unemployed. And then in 2016, it is now not a blue-collar worker anymore, but someone in a suit and with a tie, and the title is You Are Fired. Now, what about this story? Is this story true? To give a very simple answer, the answer is no, at least not for the past. Here I have a quote that maybe I won't read entirely, but you may have a look at if you like, also from Time magazine, where the same fear is expressed. Now it's again in the early period of digitalization in the 1960s. The same fear is expressed that automation will eliminate job, and much of it actually reads like something that you could read nowadays. I mean, maybe a few buzzwords are missing, like the internet, but much of it is still repeated today. But at the time, it was a fear about job loss due to digital progress possible in 1961. And now we are already 60 years later, more than half of a century. Which jobs are now lost to digital transformation? Those jobs that are lost are routine jobs. Routine jobs are defined as jobs that have tasks which can be translated into a computer program in a sufficiently cheap way so that the computer or just some kind of digital technology can then perform these jobs. And now I'm not familiar with the literature you will look at, but when you look at what digitalization does to urban economies, maybe try to look at that routine versus non-routine dimension and how routine tasks shift to computer, and then people are increasingly performing non-routine tasks that rather complement what the computer does. So somewhere, I think I wanted to say that, yeah, it's somewhere I haven't written it down, but so far I should add here to what I've written, there is no evidence of really net job loss due to digitalization or to automation. Yeah? So the fears have been unfounded so far, in the sense that there is no evidence that the total amount of jobs in countries has been massively reduced because of digitalization. However, some jobs are reorganized so that they contain more non-routine tasks afterwards. The job that are difficult to replace by computers are the jobs that require a lot of empathy, creativity, or complex manual dexterity. Those are hard to replace by computers and robots. And again, this is a dimension maybe to look for in the economic activities in cities. there is some evidence that the jobs at risk of automation with a strong routine content have been medium skilled rather than low or high skilled. And here I have just one piece of statistics from the US to illustrate this. Here we have change in employment by major occupational categories for 4 different decades. And you see that and on the left-hand side, you have low-skilled or mostly low-skilled jobs like food, cleaning services, protective services. And then on the right-hand side, you have mostly high-skilled jobs like technicians, professionals, and managers. And you see that across all decades, it's the medium-skilled jobs that have the lowest increase or the highest decline, depending on the decade you look at. And here at the high end, we have in the early decade very strong increases, and afterwards the increases are a bit lower, but we have only one category here with a little bit of decline. Now, obviously, the overall job dynamics were not the same. This is why in some decades you see more of an increase, and in some decades you see more of a decline. But this is not something research was so far able to attribute to digitalization. Overall, yeah, here's what I want to say earlier. Overall, automation and digitalization have led to little net job loss so far. Now, why is this the case? The reason is that technological progress has maybe automated some jobs, but it has also increased people's real incomes, their purchasing power. So it has also led to a demand for more and new goods and services, and this has in turn led to job creation. However, for the ongoing wave of digitalization, so for everything related to internet, artificial intelligence, and so on, we have too little evidence yet. Yeah, it could be that we should not be overly pessimistic, given that we have had 60 years of digital transformation already without drastic net job loss, but still the future could be different from the past. A few final remarks on economic shifts in urban areas. As I said, is not my area of research and teaching, but I think it is a very interesting perspective of application to look at processes of structural change, processes of digital transformation, but also processes of reorganizing jobs. Reorganizing in the sense that some jobs may become obsolete and new jobs will emerge, but reorganizing also in the sense that the profession remains the same. For example, a secretary, this is a profession that has not vanished because of digital transformation, but what a secretary does today is very different from what she did 60 years ago. So most of these shifts were also associated with a growth in cities, especially early on. They are also likely to be faster in urban areas than in rural ones, although I have not presented any numbers on that. A question you might also ask in the contents of post-industrial cities is whether digitalization leads to regionally more dispersed or more concentrated activity. Now, this is something research has not yet produced any easy answer on. I mean, there are two counteracting forces. With the internet, it's easier to have dispersed activity. On the other hand, the internet has in some sense been complementary to economic activity that is very complex and also very knowledge intensive. And for knowledge intensive activity, it's often an advantage if people can also be in one place, if they can meet, if they can easily interact. I mean, we may ask the question what the current crisis does to all this, but I think it's too early to answer. So thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to any remarks and questions.